I thought I was just living my life honestly, until one secret from my past flipped everything upside down. Now I'm alone, judged by everyone I once trusted, and no one's defending me. I'm Claire. I'm 25, and I just got out of what I thought was a good relationship because my boyfriend couldn't handle my past like a mature person. Everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster now, but really Eric just couldn't deal with the fact that I had a life before him. We were together for about a year, and everything was actually really good between us. Eric's 26 works in some kind of tech consulting thing that honestly I never fully understood, but whatever, it paid well enough that we could afford this nice little apartment together downtown. Everyone always said we looked perfect together, and we kind of were. He treated me well, never really complained when I wanted to go out with my friends, pretty much checked all the boxes for ideal boyfriend material. The thing is, I've always had this close friend Bryce, who I've known for like 3 years now. He's 27, super funny. Just one of those people who totally gets my sense of humor and personality. Eric knew about him from literally day one of our relationship, because I'm not one of those girls who thinks you have to drop all your friends just because you're dating someone. That's actually really unhealthy behavior if you think about it. Bryce and I would hang out pretty regularly, grab coffee, go to concerts, normal friend stuff that normal people do. Eric seemed totally fine with it in the beginning and never said he had a problem. If he did have issues, he should have spoken up like an adult instead of bottling it up and then having a complete meltdown later. That's on him, not me. But here's what I didn't think I needed to tell Eric, and honestly, it wasn't really his business anyway. Since it happened before we were together, Bryce and I used to hook up sometimes when we were both single, like a friends with benefits situation, nothing serious or romantic. It was casual, we both understood what it was. And when I started getting serious with Eric, that obviously stopped. Well, mostly stopped. There might have been a few times early on when Eric and I weren't even official yet, where Bryce and I maybe got a little flirty, but that was before we were exclusive. So technically, it doesn't count. The point is, Eric knew I had guy friends, and he knew Bryce was important to me. If he had such a huge problem with it, he should have said something instead of pretending to be okay with it for an entire year. I hate when people do that passive-aggressive thing where they act fine and then explode later over stuff they should have dealt with from the beginning. And honestly, Eric used to be kind of a player in college. He told me stories about hooking up with different girls and partying constantly, but suddenly when it comes to my past, he gets all judgmental about it, like, hello, double standard much. At least I was honest about my friendships. He probably still talks to girls he used to mess around with. But somehow that's different because he's a guy. I guess I always tried to include Eric in plans with Bryce when I could. It's not like I was being secretive about hanging out with him. Well, okay. Maybe I didn't always mention every single time we grabbed lunch or whatever, but that's because Eric would get this annoying look sometimes when I brought up Bryce's name, like this little flash of irritation that he thought I didn't notice. So sometimes it was just easier to not mention it if it was going to cause unnecessary drama over nothing. But I was never doing anything wrong. Bryce is genuinely one of my closest friends and has been there for me through a lot of difficult stuff. When my mom was in the hospital last year, Bryce was the one who drove me there because Eric was stuck at some work conference he couldn't get out of. When I was stressed about drama at my job, Bryce always knew exactly what to say to make me feel better. Eric tries, but sometimes he just doesn't understand me the way Bryce does. Maybe Eric was intimidated by that connection or whatever, but that's his own insecurity to deal with. I shouldn't have to give up important friendships just to make my boyfriend feel better about himself. That's controlling behavior. And I've seen too many of my friends lose themselves in relationships like that. I was determined not to be one of those girls who disappears when she gets a boyfriend. Looking back now, I can see that Eric was probably building up resentment about the Bryce situation for months. Without saying anything, he'd make these little passive-aggressive comments, sometimes like asking if I really needed to see Bryce so much or suggesting we do couple things instead. I thought he was just being a little clingy, but maybe he was actually more bothered than I realized. Still, that's a communication problem on his end. If something's bothering you in a relationship, you need to speak up clearly instead of expecting your partner to read your mind. Everything blew up at this stupid game night we went to with our friend group a few weeks ago. We do this thing every month where we get together at someone's place, order food, play board games, or those card games with random questions. It's usually pretty fun and drama-free. This time we were at Marcus and Jenna's place, and everything was going normal until someone drew this card about cheating and whether you could forgive a partner who cheated. Of course, Eric immediately jumps in with this whole speech about how he absolutely hates cheaters and how it's the ultimate betrayal and all this dramatic stuff. I felt my stomach drop because obviously I knew about my past with my ex, but I figured it wasn't relevant since Eric didn't know about it, and it happened before we were together anyway. But then I noticed Marcus giving me this weird look, and Jenna got all uncomfortable and quiet. It was like they knew something, and were waiting to see what would happen. The whole vibe in the room shifted, and suddenly everyone was staring at me like I was supposed to confess something. Eric still going on about how cheating is unforgivable, and people who cheat will always do it again, just really laying it on thick with the moral superiority. I tried to change the subject to something lighter, but you could tell everyone was still thinking about that stupid question. The rest of the night felt tense and awkward, and I kept catching people giving me strange looks. When we got home, Eric seemed quiet and thoughtful, which is never a good sign because he gets all introspective when something's bothering him. Instead of just talking about it like a normal person, the next day, he comes to me with this serious expression and asks if there's anything about my past relationships that I haven't told him. I try to play it off like I didn't know what he was talking about, but he kept pressing and asking specific questions. But whether I'd ever cheated on anyone, finally, I just decided to be honest because I was tired of the interrogation and I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Anyway, I told him yes, there was one time in my previous relationship where I hooked up with someone else, but it was a really complicated situation, and it happened over a year before I even met him. I emphasized that it was a one-time mistake and that I was in a terrible place in that relationship. I thought he'd appreciate my honesty and maturity in being able to discuss something difficult, but instead, he gets this look on his face like I had just told him I murdered someone. He started asking all these detailed questions about when it happened and why and who it was with. I tried to explain that it wasn't something I was proud of, but that people make mistakes and learn from them. Eric got all upset and started pacing around our apartment like he was having some kind of crisis. He's asking me why I never told him before and acting like I deliberately hid it from him to deceive him or something. I tried to explain that it's not exactly the kind of thing you bring up on a first date and that I didn't think it was relevant to our relationship since it happened before we were together. Then he starts asking about the person I cheated with, and I really didn't want to get into those details because I knew it would just make everything worse, but he kept pushing and pushing until finally I admitted it was Bryce. The look on his face when I said that was like I had physically slapped him. He immediately starts freaking out about how I've been hanging out with Bryce this whole time, and how could I not tell him that we had that kind of history? I tried to explain that Bryce and I are just friends now, and that what happened before was completely separate from our current friendship, but Eric wasn't hearing any of it. What really annoyed me was how he was acting like I had personally betrayed him when this all happened before I even knew he existed. Like, sorry, but I had a whole life before you, and sometimes that life was complicated. Then I had to tell him the whole truth about Bryce and me, because he obviously wasn't going to let it go. So I explained that yes, we used to have a friends with benefits situation before I met Eric. We weren't dating or anything serious, just hooking up sometimes when we were both single. Eric's reaction was exactly what I expected, complete shock, like I had been lying to him our entire relationship. He started going on about how I had been deceiving him by not telling him that Bryce was someone I used to sleep with, but like was I supposed to give him a detailed sexual history of every person in my friend group? That's not normal or healthy behavior. I tried to explain that what Bryce and I had was purely physical and that we both understood it wasn't going anywhere romantic. When I started getting serious with Eric, that whole thing with Bryce obviously ended, and we went back to just being friends like before. It's actually pretty mature that we were able to transition back to friendship without any drama, but Eric couldn't seem to wrap his head around the concept that two people could have a sexual history and then just be platonic friends afterward. The whole fight went on for hours and kept going in circles. Eric would ask the same questions over and over like he was trying to catch me in a lie. I kept explaining that it was one mistake from my past that I learned from, but he couldn't accept that explanation. What really hurt was how he was making it seem like I was this terrible person who couldn't be trusted. By the end of that conversation, we were both exhausted, and Eric said he needed time to think about everything. I thought that was probably good since we were just talking in circles anyway. I figured once he calmed down and thought about it rationally, he'd realized he was overreacting and we could move past it, but the way he was looking at me was different than I'd ever seen before, like he was seeing me as a completely different person. 2 days later, Eric came to me and said he had made his decision. He said that while he cared about me, he couldn't continue the relationship knowing that I was still close friends with someone I had cheated with in a previous relationship. He said it was a boundary he couldn't cross and that he didn't think we were compatible. I was honestly shocked because I thought once he calmed down he would realize he was being unreasonable, but apparently, he had spent those 2 days convincing himself that I was some kind of untrustworthy person. He tried to make it sound all mature and thoughtful, but really, he was being judgmental about something that had nothing to do with our actual relationship. What really hurt was how he kept emphasizing that he couldn't trust me like I had personally betrayed him somehow. I reminded him that I had been completely faithful throughout our entire relationship, but he said that maintaining a friendship with Bryce was disrespectful. I asked him if he was really willing to throw away a good relationship over something that happened before we even met, and he said yes. That's when I realized Eric wasn't the mature, understanding person I thought he was. Any guy who truly loved me would be able to work through something like this instead of just giving up. The worst part was how calm he was about the whole thing, like he was breaking up with me over something trivial instead of ending a year-long relationship. After he left, I immediately started calling friends and family to get some support and validation that Eric was being unreasonable. My sister was sympathetic at first, but then when I explained the whole situation with Bryce, she got kind of quiet and said maybe I should have been more upfront about that history. That really annoyed me because I felt like I was getting judged by everyone for something that wasn't even a big deal. I also called my best friend Rachel, and she had a similar reaction. Everyone was so quick to assume that I must have done something wrong instead of recognizing that Eric was being unreasonably jealous and controlling. It was really frustrating because I felt like people were taking his side without even hearing my perspective. Within a week of the breakup, it felt like the entire story had gotten out to our whole friend group and beyond. Apparently, Eric had told Marcus and Jenna what happened, and they shared it with other people, and suddenly everyone knew all the details. What really bothered me was how people were talking about it like I was this terrible person who had deceived Eric, when really I had just maintained a friendship with someone from my past. I started getting weird looks from people when I'd run into them around town at the grocery store or coffee shops. I'd see someone I knew and they'd give me this awkward smile and try to avoid having a real conversation. It was obvious that people were talking about me behind my back. The worst part was when I went to our usual Friday night hangout spot and half the group acted like they didn't see me. I tried to talk to Jen about it because I thought we were close enough that she would hear me out, but when I explained my side, she just kept saying things like, I can see why Eric was upset, and maybe you should have been more honest from the beginning. Even Marcus seemed to be taking Eric's side, saying that trust is really important in relationships. It was really hurtful to realize that people I considered good friends were so quick to judge me based on incomplete information. Nobody seemed interested in understanding the complexity of the situation. I started spending more time with Bryce during this period because he was literally the only person who wasn't making me feel like garbage about everything. But then people started saying that proved Eric was right about me and Bryce. The gossip got so bad that I heard from coworkers that people were talking about my situation at other offices around town. My reputation was completely destroyed, and I was becoming some kind of cautionary tale about dishonest girlfriends. 3 months after the breakup, my whole world completely fell apart. I found out through social media that Eric had gotten a promotion and was looking better than ever in all his photos. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was finding out he was dating someone new, this sweet, quiet type who works with kids and probably never had a complicated relationship in her life. I saw them together at a coffee shop and they looked so happy and comfortable with each other. She was laughing at something he said, and he was looking at her like she was amazing. What really hurt was seeing how relaxed Eric seemed with her. When we were together, there was always tension or drama, but with this new girl, he just looked content. Meanwhile, the thing with Bryce had imploded when I tried to make it more serious. Turns out he was never actually interested in being my boyfriend. He just liked the attention and drama. When I brought up making our relationship official, he suddenly got weird and distant, saying he wasn't ready for something serious and valued our friendship too much to risk it. I realized Bryce had just been using me for sex and emotional support while I was vulnerable. The rejection was almost worse than the breakup with Eric because at least Eric was honest about his reasons. So there I was, completely alone and humiliated while everyone in town knew about it because Bryce had been telling people I was getting too clingy. My reputation was completely destroyed. People weren't just talking about the Eric situation anymore. They were also talking about how I had immediately jumped into something with Bryce and got rejected. Even worse, other people started sharing their own stories about me from past relationships, painting me as manipulative and difficult. My family started distancing themselves too after I tried to get them involved. My mom said she was tired of hearing about my relationship drama and that maybe I should focus on working on myself at work. Things got uncomfortable because coworkers had heard about everything. My boss even called me in to discuss whether my personal issues were affecting my work performance. The final straw came when I found out Eric and his new girlfriend had gotten engaged after only 6 months of dating. 6 months. It took him a year to even say he loved me. But with her, everything was moving at light speed. When I saw their engagement photos, they looked so in love and excited about their future together. I wanted to scream that they didn't know the real story. They didn't know how Eric had thrown away a perfectly good relationship because he couldn't handle my past, but I knew that saying anything would just make me look bitter and jealous that night. I almost sent Eric a long text telling him exactly what I thought, but I deleted it because I knew it would just confirm what everyone thought about me. The truth is I'm still angry about the whole situation, not just at Eric, but at everyone who turned their backs on me when things got messy. I'm angry at Bryce for using me when I was vulnerable. I'm angry at my friends for believing gossip instead of trusting me. Most of all, I'm angry that I'm the one who ended up alone and humiliated while everyone else got to move on like nothing happened. Eric got his perfect new girlfriend. Bryce got to avoid any consequences, and my former friends got to feel superior by judging me. I know people expect me to feel sorry for my mistakes and promise to do better, but honestly, I don't think I did anything terrible enough to deserve how I've been treated. Everyone acts like I'm this awful person, but really, I was just trying to maintain my friendships and be honest when asked about my past. If Eric couldn't handle dating someone with a complicated history, that's his problem. If Bryce couldn't handle a real relationship, that's his loss. And if my friends were looking for an excuse to drop me anyway, then they weren't really good friends to begin with. I'm done trying to win back people who obviously don't value me. I'm done apologizing for things that weren't even that wrong in the first place. Everyone wants to paint me as the villain, but I know the truth about what really happened. Maybe someday I'll move somewhere new where people don't know about all this drama and I can start fresh, but for now, I'm just focused on taking care of myself and not letting other people's opinions define my worth. They can all keep their judgments and their perfect little lives. I don't need any of them anyway.